Hello everyone. This presentation is Prehistoric Cultivation Futures, Recent Insights from the Amazon. Well, the motivation of this presentation is that we have already a satisfactory quantity of data about past Amazonian cultivation. So I will try here to put this data together in order to think how we as archaeologists can contribute and join a whole group of scientists in planetary discussions about more sustainable futures in face of our current planetary crisis. So, first, some misconceptions about early forms of food production. First, think that cultivation always primarily is about human control over other species, like human species are the master of the planet. I also think that favorite domesticate few species as exclusive foundations for further cultural developments. These would evolve as a series of revolutions, beginning in the Neolithic, where we started relying on domesticated, and finally the intensive monoculture as practiced today, as if the future of food production should rely in intensively productivity of few species, for example, soybeans. So, some recent views about early forms of food productions. There was a much more creative experimentation in food systems and plant use, and emergence of food production systems was about dependence upon the agencies and ecologies of other species. So our food production systems emerged as an entanglement between our and other species agendas and ecologies. I will rely this presentation in four main topics. First, talk about early agrobiodiversity in the Amazon, dry and wet farming, the diversification of food production, and how you can radically think about the potential of food production in your planet, thinking about the past. So about agro biodiversity. As modern human species, we are walking this planet for more than 100,000 years. This graph above shows the oscillation of planet climate during this time, with drastic climatic fluctuations between glacial, the lower part, and interglacial, higher part climates. It was only in the last 12,000 years that the climate stabilizes, giving rise to this special warm time that we are living today, and allow us to start to cultivate in fully developed civilizations that we call the Holocene. So what happens in this special time, the Holocene? It's a cycle where, due to the climatic amelioration, human communities respond to this climate stability by propagating and tending plants and beginning the food production, not only depending anymore on gathering or hunting as in previous times. But in the Amazon, there is unique trajectories of human-plant interaction. First, you need to think that agriculture, the total reliance on domesticated plants or animals, never happened in the Amazon. Cultivation is intentional propagation or tending of plants. Those plants can or not be distinguished by wild relatives. And domestication, a process that leads to the genetic distinction between wild ancestors, and these species start to be dependent on humans. What happens in the Amazon is you have cultivation without agriculture and cultivation without domestication. So you have in the Amazon at least four main areas of plant domestication for around 10,000 years ago. So there's very important species that until today um, is worldwide widespread. For example, here we have the cacao that we all love, chocolate, pineapples. Um, these species some people loves, but it's not so good for our health. The tobacco, but also domestication occurs among species that provides high valuable and nutrient-rich fruits, such as the acai. In the last decades, these fruits turned into an international important commodity, as expressed in this New York Times report regarded as a superfood. And also the much appreciated Brazilian nut. When we see the current international market and value of those products domesticated and intentionally propagated by ancient inhabitants in the Amazon, you can realize the capacity of these three species to sustain large and numerous populations. Well, as you could see, the legacy of ancient food domestication production in the Amazon has a wider impact in your world consumption. It is intensive, resilient, and diverse. How this diversity crystallizes in the Amazon? First, we have to look for traditional techniques of food production. Not only procurement and tendering of specific foods led to intensification, but also traditional forms of preparation for stands of cultivation led to intensification and biodiversity. Here we see the typical slash and burn technique, where parcels of lands are prepared for cultivation by burning. Not only the burning helps to open the areas, but also the charcoal by this burning um, improves the soil nutrients. When you look at these pictures, looks for us a little bit aggressive, like burning the forest. But studies by colleagues has proven that this technique helped to make a significant contribution to the biodiversity that characterizes today's Amazonia. Here we see the succession of parcels of land that passed through these years of technique. So you see in the left the old growth forest, so untouched forest, then the first burning, the shift cultivation, a second growth forest, second burning, and then this parcel led to rest, leading to agroforestry system. And this agroforestry system is much more biodiverse than the old growth forest. And archaeobotanical studies also proves that this technique in a long term changes complete the face of the forest composition from a less diverse phase, so phase 1 below, passing through this slash and burn technique and helping to increase the forest biodiversity and the increase of favorite species, phase 2, until a full-fledged cultivation allied to the use of forestal products as the main food production system, so-called polyculture agroforestry. All those studies are now challenging the notion as the Amazon as pristine, untouched forests. In fact, current archaeobotanical studies proves that current Amazon forest is the result of millennia of action of human modification. This is exemplified in this study, the predominance in the Amazonian tree flora. Although distribution of trees comprising 6,000 species, only 227 species, about 1.4% of all species in this area that was researched, account for 15% of all trees of the Amazon. This emphasizes the ecological and evolutionary significance of these dominant species, which include economically important trees such as acai and Brazilian nut, as we talked before. This is crucial for conservation efforts, as these dominant species play key roles in carbon storage and biodiversity. Amazonian indigenous community in the past not only altered significant the forest composition, increases its biodiversity, but also practiced innovative forms of intensive farming that can help us today to tackle our current climate crisis, called the dry and wet farming. One of those kind of farmings are the dark or carbon-rich dark earth soils. We can see in the right a typical unaltered form of soil in the Amazon. By nature, the Amazon soil is very poor in nutrients for farming. But archaeological research has shown that around 6,000 years ago, indigenous people started to intentionally modify the soil, creating carbon-rich background that's highly fertile. This is called the Terras Pretas da Amazônia. This Terras Pretas was first described 120 years ago. So there are expanses of dark soil that is exceptionally fertile and contain large quantities of archaeological artifacts. And it's a proof that's intentional modification for agriculture purposes. Another form of cultivation occurs in wet savannas. In order to guarantee cultivation year-round, as 6 months of the year those savannas are inundated, the indigenous group created raised fields, small, round to rectangular mounds up to 3 meters in height, where they could plant a variety of crops. Experiments with those raised fields among traditional groups in Bolivia has shown that although there is a substantial initial investment to build it, the high and continuous productivity that it provides over a long time period makes it a labor-efficient technology. And this kind of farming is not only highly productive, but it's also a method that can help carbon emissions to the atmosphere. Well, as you could see, the legacy of ancient food domestication and production in the Amazon has wider impact in your world consumption. It is intensive, resilient, and diverse. How this diversity crystallizes in the Amazon, the demographic transition. This graph, in shaded gray, represents the demographic estimates of the Amazon region from 10,000 years ago until the European conquest. We can see that even though the domestication of species started from the beginning, the demography stays stable, probably because the Amerindians were conducting all kinds of experiments and processes as described before, until that around 2,000 years ago, we can see a sharp exponential increase in population, what we call the demographic transition. This led to a cultural explosion in the Amazon. So you can see geometric figures in the soil. So intensive labor, creative geometric figures, not for defensive purpose, but for sacred or religious purposes. Another of those figures, those geometric figures. Also, we see the development of cities, and this is a LiDAR, a laser radar over the forest. We can see cities surrounded by moats, and in the center of the city, pyramid-like features representing this administrative and religious center. Also, you have, for example, megaliths, so circular arrangements of rocks, also for religious purposes, and elaborate ceremonial and funerary practice, and highly elaborated ceramics. Well, this all was a development. Population growth in the Amazon led into a developed cultural background. But now you are facing a planetary crisis, the Anthropocene, so you have to look back and try to move forward in face of this crisis. If you can see to the timeline in climate fluctuation from 600,000 years ago until the present, the lines represent the cold and warm phases of our planet until the stability of the Holocene, as we see in the beginning. The light to dark green bars in the center represent the safe climate space, the one where the humanity could prevail and start civilizations that led to our current way of life. However, now you are getting out of this safe space to a warmest and dangerous one. So here you are in the middle of decision, or we stop our human emissions and biosphere degradation and stabilize our Earth, or we cross the threshold and fall into a hothouse Earth that could lead to mass extinction. But a group of climate scientists led by the University of Potsdam has created the concept of planet boundaries, blue circle in the center of this graph, from where outside these boundaries every part of the Earth system can lead to a planetary collapse. You can see through this scheme that the biosphere integrity and geochemical flows are already in red, meaning that we are operating in an area of high risk of collapse. This collapse can be reflecting on certain planetary tipping points, points whose threshold, if we surpass, can be irreversible and lead to a chain of collapse. Those tipping points are at risk depending on temperature, represented by different colors in this graph. And you can see the Amazon forest is one of those tipping points. But until we don't breach those tipping points, the planet is self-regulating. As much as we increase the fossil carbon emission and land use by deforestation for cattle or monoculture production, the ocean, land, and atmosphere are regulating the climate by sinking those carbon emissions. But some self-regulatory systems are at the brink, as the Amazon forest. Displays of high biodiversity, fruit of past interventions, as we see before. This tip point has probably have been already hit because of intentional deforestation and burning to relieve tracts of land for monoculture. So we can see here several articles of The Guardian saying exactly the same, like climate crisis, Amazon rainforest tipping points looming, data shows. And Amazon rainforest now emitting more CO2 than it absorbs. So instead of being a carbon sink, now it's a carbon emission place. So coming back to the past, there is future from the Amazon past. Can you think about a future way of our planet from the Amazon past? So first you have to think about the radical potential of prehistoric food production system and slash lessons for future conservation allied to food security. Amazon case study of biodiverse food culture includes an array of creative experiments, cultures that are still maintained and actively practiced today by indigenous groups. So when you are talking about indigenous groups in the Amazon, we are not talking only about small, simple villages. In the 9th century, the Garden City movement started to promote the idea of satellite communities surrounding the central city and separated by green belts. These garden cities would contain proportionate areas of residence, industry, and agriculture, giving equal space and promoting resilience and sustainability, as well as population well-being. Well, as you can see here in the left, 12,000 years before this movement starts, Amazonians were already living like that. This is an example. It's an archaeological site of a garden city, this Amazonian garden city. This is around the size of the city of Westminster and could house at least 20,000, 25,000 persons. So as archaeologists working with traditional food production societies, we can join planetary conversations by demonstrating success of indigenous people, not only guarantee large populations and food security, but at the same time increase forest preservation and biodiversity. We can join discussions in 2013 agenda targeting to protect 30% of land and sea, but also local indigenous groups to manage this biodiversity. We can act, potentially bring together biodiversity and human rights agenda through archaeology. So, one last question. There is a future from the past. Can you think beyond Amazonia? Well, let's think about one of the largest cities of the world, London. It's already regarded as a garden city, but not the 9th century concept. In fact, there's a research project. You can see large tracts of green areas around the city. So lots of parks, green spaces. So can you think as a real garden city in the way that the Amazonian Indians were doing in the past and the people in the 9th century were thinking? But what's the problem if you think about urban resilience and food security? Most of the urban parks that are still conceived as an 18th century elite mentality, just for leisure and contemplation. Can you make some change and open up those space for public, productive gardens? It's a question. So to conclude, thoughts or aspirations that even an urban activism is an opportunity to practice the art of growing even small things in your flats, to stimulate our curiosity, your awareness, it is and tastes, and the needs of those other small things. Get entangled with other living things, not be detached about the other living things. After all, those opportunities led us to thrive as a food productive planet.